we can jump right in. Actually, we're right on time if we skip the break. It's perfect.
Amazing.
Let's move on now to our fourth speaker. It's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Heiko Hamann from the University of Lübeck in Germany, where he conducts research in the broad topics of swarm intelligence, combining tools from physics, mathematics, and biology to model and control swarms and complex systems. So Heiko, you should have the privileges and you can get started.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's always my great pleasure to present some of my work, and it's also great to see so many here who are actually interested in swarm robotics. So that's really cool. Yeah, just before I go into some more details, a little bit of like what we do at my lab. So I've published quite a bit about collective decision making. We also did a little bit about swarm construction, and then we work on biohybrid systems. And we had this project for robotica, which maybe could also something I could have talked about here today, because it's real world natural plants and robots, which is fun. So if you're interested, maybe Google it and look for yourself. But here I want to actually focus on something else. So I'm not totally sure whether I will really deliver on the subject. So real world depends on what you think of it, right? So does it mean outdoors, or is it also like just real robots, even if they're in the lab? So for me, like for here and this talk today, I would say, okay, the real world has one specific feature, which is it's dynamic. It's a dynamic world. It's a dynamic environment. And well, I would be totally in favor of kicking the swarm robots out of the lab. And we're actually in the process of doing that. It's just that we don't really have results about that. So we won a grant 2 years ago where we were now in a position to acquire 6 of these ClearPath Robotics Shackle robots that you can see here. It's an outdoor robot, but actually one of the smaller ones. So it's like 17 kilos. And yeah, we have 6 of them and playing with them. So let's see what we can do with them in terms of outdoor swarm robotics or field swarm robotics. Today, however, yeah, I'm sorry, I will talk about lab experiments, but I will try to introduce to you concepts that could be of great use to deal with dynamic worlds, with dynamic environments. And so I give you here the talk in 2 pieces, so we will rush through it quite a bit, but hopefully there's something in it for everybody. And I think I'm also switching the order that was defined by the title. So I start in part A with minimize surprise. So allow me to take you on a little journey to some weird other question. What is actually really your brain, right? So if you talk about a human brain or any animal's brain, what is it really, right? I mean, okay, neuroscience tells you something, then, I mean, I'm not serious here, but you could also check with Google and then it tells you some weird answers like it's an organ, it's a time machine. I think that's an interesting concept, and there might actually be some truth to it. But I mean, there's many answers, obviously, right? But so one answer could be that you try to listen a little bit to Helmholtz or here Carl Friston. I guess he's like one of the most cited living scientists currently. And he defined this like brain theory that is called free energy principle. I think it's impossible to define it within 30 seconds, but basically it's perceiving your brain as a prediction machine, and it just permanently tries to anticipate what could possibly happen next. And if it's true, right, so if it's correctly predicted what's happening, then it's like happy, because that's also a way to save some energy, basically. So this free energy idea is a bit more metaphorical, but then like much easier and intuitive, I think it is to think of it as a prediction error, right? So basically the brain is trying to make predictions and then minimizing the prediction error. Or you can do like some real statistics and really get into the full theory. However, here, what we do is that's really like model free, and yeah, no too complex equations here. This is not out of blue sky, right? So there's some other works as well. You might notice some names here like Schmidhuber or Lipson. So there's many people who are looking into curiosity and all sorts of things, right? So what's really special about what we are doing to some extent is, well, usually when you have a robot, you need a controller. So you will, and if you do it based on artificial neural networks, then you would train an action selection network, right? So something that tells the robot what to do next. That's normal. But then we also add a second network, which is what we call the prediction network. And this network gets the same inputs, the same sensor inputs as the action selection network. But then as an output, it has to predict whatever it believes will be the next sensor inputs for the robot in the next round, like next time step or whatever you define as a time phase here. And then, you can check, like, was it right? And this defines a prediction error, and then you can try to optimize that. And why would you do that? Maybe it becomes clearer in a second. So we do some evolutionary swarm robotics here, right? So we use methods of evolutionary computation to train these networks. So there's a reward, or in this framework, we would call it fitness, that is rewarding or giving score to making correct predictions. And that's the fun part here. So we only reward making correct predictions. We don't care in any way about what the robot's actually doing, right? So there's no desired behavior, not really an engineering approach, right? It's more like open-ended, more like an A-life approach, but I think it's fun, and it can be maybe of some use also for a more engineering kind of mind. What's also interesting is that the environment here, depending on what scenarios we do, is a bit like self-referential. So the other robots are your environment in some of these scenarios. And so you try to predict the behaviors of your clones. We have a homogeneous swarm. Everybody is running the same controller. And then basically you observe your neighbors, and what the prediction network has to do is like predicting whatever your neighbors will be doing next, relative also to whatever you did in between. And so what you might see there, like, long story short, evolutionary dynamics, it converges on something, and it will try to put the system into a boring niche, right? So do some behaviors that make it easy to predict what's going to happen next, right? And we've come a long way with this research. So we did very boring abstract simulations in the beginning, and then we moved slowly our way to now that finally I feel kind of comfortable to show you here some results in this real world workshop. So we did recently some simulations with actual robot simulators, and then also some in the lab experiments with real robots. So just like to give you a very quick idea of how it looked like before, right? We would have this tiny little silly simulation, and the robots then would do something like flocking, because that's allowing them to predict more easily what's going to happen next. They try to influence, like put some order or some pattern into the world by behaving like properly, and then they can predict what's going to happen. So we went to the real robot. So this is a Themio 2 robot. We extended it with a Raspberry Pi, external battery, some light sensors, a blade in front, because we want to do some like box pushing or some interaction with some environment that is not just containing the robots. And we have a force sensor. And we also did some simulations using the Weebot simulator. Concerning the evolutionary algorithm, if we do that online onboard on the real robots, we have to be a bit careful in terms of like how much can we really afford, right? So for how long can you run it, and how much calculations can you allow it to do, and especially how many evaluations of potential ANN pairs, right? The action selection network and the prediction network, how many of them can you evaluate on the real swarm in the real world with a swarm of robots? So here we do something very simple. It's not that the population concept of the evolutionary algorithm is almost gone. You have a parent, like the king, then you produce a mutant by introducing some mutations, small changes of weights in the ANNs, like actually both of them, right? And then you do an evaluation. That means like running this homogeneous swarm in simulation or maybe on the real robots for a while to determine whether the predictions were going well, right? And then you can make a selection, which here is just like, okay, do we replace the current king because now this new mutant is better, or do we actually keep the parent because it was still better? And like to give you some idea of what you get here, I mean, this is the fun part, right? So imagine you do an evolutionary run here. This is simulation and Weebots, and you actually will never know before what you will get in the end, right? So this is like results from different evolutionary runs, and sometimes you get that, and sometimes you get something else. And these robots all behave in a way that we can still understand like why they're doing that, right? Because they try to like create these boring environments so that they can predict them, so they aggregate, but they also see these dynamic behaviors where they disperse a bit, rotate, or sometimes they do little dances, right? But trying to like keep the other one in the blind spots of their sensors. If you know a little bit about the infrared sensors of the femur, you might know that the side they are blind basically. Okay, and so then finally we also did first experiments in the lab, but with real robots, and okay, you know, they behave kind of like randomly in the beginning. Also, this is the work of a student, and there's some interaction here with the robots, human interaction, you know. But what you can see after some while, so the robots are like randomly pushing blocks around, but towards the end of this run, you will see that they have actually created themselves like little spaces that are empty, that without any blocks. And then they do a very reasonable thing, right? They actually start then just to turn at the spot, which makes it for them quite easy to predict what's going to happen next, right? So they have some sensor input about close by robots and whether they're pushing something or not. And if they're just never pushing something, it's easy for them to predict. So they not necessarily converge on that, right? Like now here, you see that they're just circling on the spot, because then they make easy, good predictions, right? But I think it's a never-ending adaptation, because you could now like move some robot, move some blocks, and interact with them in some way, like making the environment dynamic again, and then they would need to adapt to that again, right? And it's kind of funny because it's self-referential. They're creating their own dynamic environment by pushing, and then you see like funny behaviors. And again, you know, this is open-ended and not like very focused on a particular task, but this would then be something we actually also follow, like how can you engineer this like self-organizing behavior. Okay, so to conclude my first part, okay, even without a task, right? We don't tell them what they have to do except for making good predictions. You can still see interesting things, right? They don't do just boring, stupid stuff. They actually do some interesting things, which is well, really a beautiful result, I think. And then I think this could be also a method to address a little bit this like pushing towards robustness, adaptivity, also for the real world, right? So here they create their own dynamic environment, but also if the environment is actually like changing faster, then you could actually use these methods maybe to like fix the problem of reacting properly in non-anticipated situations. Okay, this was part A. So I have still a few minutes for part B, which I call robust scalability. So let's think a little bit about scalability of concepts for a moment. And I think that's a fun game to play. So whenever you see an engineered system, you can ask yourself, like, how far could you push it? Like, what is the absolute maximal scalability of that system? Like, how big can the building be, right? So what could possibly be the biggest plane that you can construct and that actually still flies? How many cars can you pack on a highway, maybe if they're autonomous and so on? And similarly for swarms, right? And with robot swarms, for many years, we have just said, yeah, fine, they maximally scale because they only work with local information, local communication, fine, right? So don't bother with scalability, you get that for free. Which is not really true, because what you actually really want to have is a constant swarm density. What is that? So that is how many robots per area do you have? And that should be, well, constant or limited to some extent, and then you can scale virtually like in any way. And that means when you put additional robots into your system, you should also give them more space, right? And then you can think about some adaptivity, like online adaptivity to changing swarm densities, which would require two things. So at the one hand, you need to find out about that, right? So, the robots should find out online during a run in the experiment, something changed. So now it's more dense or it's less dense. Let's do something about it, right? And then step two would be some response. And here I call it like either software response or hardware response. And concerning this, what I would call hardware response or embodied response is something that you see here on the right-hand side. So there's a beautiful paper by someone you might know, Siddharth, at ICRA 2019. Where they have this concept of voluntary retreat. So the robots actually find out, oh, actually, there's too many of us. And then some of them like take themselves out of the game and move them like themselves to the boundaries. That's not what we are doing here. So in this experiment, what we are showing is that it's actually more like a disturbance, right? So someone from outside is changing the swarm density. We are actually removing robots as experimenters, and then the robots have to detect it and react accordingly, right? And keep in mind that this is like a typical swarm performance curve. So there is like system size, which would be number of robots. Actually, for a fixed area, that would rather be swarm density, right? And then if you have swarm density on the horizontal axis, there's a sweet spot usually, right? So there's a concept of like having too few, a concept of having too many per area, and then there's a sweet spot where the whole swarm is performing optimally to some extent, whatever it means in the respective experiment. And you want to, well, wouldn't it be nice that the robots detected themselves, like what is actually the swarm density currently doing? Are we doing fine? And could you fix, and that's what I call software here. So can you fix a parameter in the control algorithm such that you adapt to that new swarm density situation? So like statistically, you could look into change detection, for example, right? So if you really want to detect a sudden change, and what we do here is that we make the robots measure the mean free path between two encounters of other robots. And I guess it's easy to understand that this must somehow scale with the swarm density. And then they try to react to that and make a good choice of adapting the parameters of the algorithm. And what I think is a beautiful problem here is that in change detection, you have a trade-off between many things actually, but like between false alarm rate, right? So you're reacting to something although there was no change, but just a measurement error, or a detection delay. So you're a bit more conservative and you're like, maybe it's not a change, let's wait, but then actually turn out to be a change and then you're late, right? So it's a speed versus accuracy trade-off again, and I think that's beautiful. And so here you see just a diagram of what the robots actually measure. It's a distribution, it looks like exponential, I guess. And these are the times, how much time passes between seeing another robot. And then if this distribution changes, a robot can measure that and then react accordingly. So I don't have too much time left, but so we took as a benchmark a simple algorithm. It's called the B-class algorithm. We have published too much about that already, but here it's not the point. It's just a benchmark. So the robots either explore, they run around, or they aggregate, and they're supposed to do that under some light. So these are the different light patterns, right? We have a dynamic environment, so we project different light patterns, and the robots should always aggregate at the brighter spot. So whenever they see another robot, they actually aggregate. They stop for a while, there's a waiting time, and once that has elapsed, then they move again to explore whether maybe there's another brighter spot or a bigger cluster somewhere else. And these waiting times, this is the feature that we can operate on online. So the robots can change this mapping of like how much light is here to how long should I wait. And we can also include the mean free path that they have measured in between, right? And if there's a longer mean free path, then that means you should maybe wait longer at some spot, because that gives you a higher probability that actually anybody else will find you there and join you, right? I think that's also very intuitive. And yeah, here just this the basic behavior. So within the circle, what you can't really see is this is the dimmed light. So there's a little light spot here, just not shown by our camera. Robots would aggregate there, and then they move actually at the spot to avoid the blind spots around them, so they can more easily detect others. And then environment changes. Now there's a bright spot, and they should somehow learn about that, but it takes them a while to get out of this like local optima there in the dimmed light and find no, there's a better brighter spot somewhere else. And so yeah, maybe I skipped that because I don't really have time. And this would then be the actual swarm density experiment. So we start with 10 robots in this environment, right? And let's say the robots are like adapted already to this swarm density. And then after half of the experiment, now we remove half of the swarm. So we have removed 5 robots. They have to detect that, right? So they measure longer mean-free paths now, and then they increase the waiting times. And only this is how they can actually make sure that at some point, quite a few of them will be aggregated. And to prove to you that there is actually, yeah, also some science behind that. So this would be the results with a control experiment. So the blue one is what you actually looked at. This is when the robots try to learn whether the swarm density changed or not. And the red line would be the non-adaptive approach. And here in the first phase, you shouldn't really see a difference between, because both of them were kind of optimized for a swarm of 10. And then after half of the experiment, we remove 5 of them. And under the right-hand light, then you see, well, here it doesn't really look like a big difference, but it's like double the amount of robots aggregate in case of the adaptation. And there's something here that, of course, it takes also the adaptive swarm a while to detect, like, oh, wait, so now the swarm density is much sparser. We should do something about it. And then they can manage to actually aggregate. And if you look into the paper, you will see that there's truly a significant difference between these two experiments. And then these are mean values from 5 real-world robot experiments, actually. Okay, so I think my time is up. I think, yeah, these two concepts, could be something that could help you also in the real world and in dynamic environments. So here you see some from my team, Tanya, Julian, and Mustafa, who actually worked on these kind of things that I've talked about here. And there's currently ongoing the DARS conference, and Tanya is presenting our newest paper there about the minimized surprise approach. So if you're aware of that, so maybe also have a look there. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to see your questions.
Thank you so much, Heiko. That was amazing. Love the part about trying to change the performance curves using software changes. That was amazing. I could keep talking forever, but we should jump into the questions here. So we have a few on Slido. There are a couple that are actually linked together, so I might just combine them into a bigger question. So this is for the minimal surprise part. So maximizing prediction accuracy produces very interesting behaviors. How might you then focus these behaviors to achieve a specific task? And I think the question that's related a little bit is, how do you define the cost functions in these different kinds of scenarios for these robots? So how would you guide the learning? Yeah.
So I think, if I understand the question correctly, so you can use this approach in at least 2 ways. So one would be like really open-ended evolution, right? You just define this cost as minimized prediction error, and then the robots will do whatever they can do to minimize this error. And what we do, and we have published a little bit of these ideas, like what you can do to push it towards a certain direction, what you would want to do as an engineer, right? You can try to predefine some of these sensor predictions, right? So you can look at the sensor pattern that you would like to see in the robot, right? So for aggregation, for example, you could say all your proximity sensors should detect something close by. And for a few of these sensors, or if you like for all of them, you predefine that as the robot's prediction or something in between, right? Just for one sensor or for 2. And this is giving you some options of pushing it in a certain direction so that they don't go for like dispersion, for example, but actually try to aggregate and then optimize the behavior so that for these like partially predefined sensor predictions, they still manage to minimize the prediction error. So this would be just one way how you could try to push it a bit more towards engineering.
I see. So this is giving me sort of like a reminder about like output-based control almost, where you're trying to drive this system to something. So like a fixed output. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Or partially fixed. Yeah.
Fantastic. Let's maybe do another question. So what is the most complex sensory pattern, ideally non-constant over time, that the evolved robots converge to during the trial? So what's sort of what is the most complex?
That's also a beautiful question, and especially the part of whether they can do something dynamic, because I mean, these robots are lazy, right? So what they do is, of course, they try to come up with a pattern that never changes, right? So if you mention them aggregating and nobody's moving, then you just, I mean, it's like weather prediction, right? You just predict whatever you see right now for tomorrow, and you have a good chance to be right. What we have seen already, so okay, we have done some of these like silly simulations also in grid worlds, and there you can actually see quite kind of like complex patterns. You know, they form like rotationally symmetric patterns, and then it's getting a bit interesting. Also, what we've seen, because I've told you that we put light sensors on the TheMU, and if we project also a light gradient at the same time and then make them do things, then we found actually at some point that they were going like in circles or something, and this like the light value they would measure would actually oscillate. And we were very happy when we found a prediction network that was actually then adapting to these oscillations in the light value. So this is, okay, not complex, just like a sine wave, right? But the network actually really adapted to that and learned to like predict. I mean, we would need to look closer into the phase shift there, but it tried to predict that this sensor value would actually oscillate. But it's one more sentence maybe. So this is definitely on our list. We would like to see also like what if you do longer time horizons, right? What if you make the network not to predict whatever's happening in the next time step, but in a second or in a minute, right? And I mean, might be difficult to get anything out of that, but then you might get very different behaviors and also maybe more dynamic behaviors and dynamic sensor patterns.
Got it. Amazing. All right. Thank you so much, Heiko. Let's move on.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, of course.